I overheard my family's plan to publicly humiliate my husband at Christmas dinner. They wanted to push me out of my marriage and into the arms of a wealthy family friend. Once we embarrassed Chris at dinner, my father said, his voice low and cold, Olivia will finally see reason to leave him. Then we can introduce her properly to Alexander. I stood outside his study listening in. I didn't scream. I didn't confront them. I just walked away. But what I did next exposed my parents in front of the entire family. Hi, I'm Olivia Pope. I'm 29 years old, and the story I'm about to tell you will leave you speechless. Not just from disbelief, but from how far my own family was willing to go to destroy my marriage. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from. I need to see I'm not alone. And subscribe if you believe in justice. Let's dive in. I come from a wealthy Chicago family where image is everything and love comes with conditions. What they did when I tried to bring love into that family would change my life forever. Growing up in the Pope household meant understanding one simple rule: appearances matter more than truth. My father, Graham Pope, built his real estate empire on reputation and connections. My mother, Victoria, came from old money and spent her life ensuring everyone knew it, straightening her posture whenever someone walked by and mentioning her maiden name in every introduction. Together, they created a dynasty built on status, expectations, and the constant pressure to be perfect. But perfection in the Pope family had a price I didn't understand until it was almost too late. Then there was my sister, Alice. 3 years older, flawlessly molded into exactly what our parents wanted. Alice learned early that cruelty wrapped in elegance was an acceptable currency in our family. I was different. Thoughtful where Alice was calculating. Kind where she was cutting. Independent where she was compliant. That made me the disappointment. Olivia, you need to act like a child from wealth, my mother would say, her lips pressing into a thin line whenever I showed compassion to someone she deemed beneath us. Her hands would grip her pearls like a rosary of judgment. Back then, I thought that was the worst they could do to me. I was wrong. Everything changed in my third year of college. I met Chris at a community fundraiser I'd organized. He was helping his father run a booth for their pawn shop, and when our eyes met, something shifted in my world. Chris had this warmth about him, this genuine kindness that made me feel seen for the first time in my life. We talked for hours that day. He told me about growing up in his father's shop, learning the value of things not by their price tags but by their stories. I told him about feeling like a stranger in my own family. You're not the problem, he said simply. They are. Those 4 words began my healing. We fell in love naturally, deeply, completely. For 6 months, I kept him separate from my family, protecting both him and the happiness he gave me. But eventually, I couldn't hide him anymore. And when I finally introduced them, my parents showed me exactly who they really were. I invited Chris to dinner at my parents' estate. The moment he walked through the door, I saw my mother's face harden, her smile freezing mid-expression, her eyes going flat and cold like a door slamming shut. My father's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching beneath his temple. Alice smirked from across the room, her champagne glass pausing at her lips, already anticipating the show.
Dinner was excruciating.
My parents barely spoke to Chris, directing all their questions through me as if he weren't sitting right there. They turned their bodies away from him, angling toward me, their eyes sliding past him like he was furniture. Then my father set down his fork with a sharp clink against fine china and looked directly at Chris. Young man, I think we need to be clear about something. You will never be allowed to be with my daughter. Whatever you think this relationship is, it ends tonight. The room went silent. Chris's hand found mine under the table, his fingers trembling slightly. With all due respect, sir, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. That's not your decision to make. My mother gasped as if I'd slapped her, her hand flying to her chest. I left that night knowing I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. But I also knew I'd chosen love over approval, and that felt like freedom. For years later, I stood in my parents' living room and told them I was getting married to Chris. My mother's face went white, all the color draining from her cheeks like water from a broken glass. You will do no such thing. You will not bring tainted blood into this family, my father added, his voice cold and final, each word dropping like ice into still water. But I did marry Chris. Without them. Without their blessing or their presence. The night before the wedding, Chris found me crying in our small apartment. We can wait, he said quietly, sitting beside me. If you need more time to. No, I interrupted, taking his hands. I'm not crying because I'm unsure. I'm crying because they're making me choose. Maybe they're right, he whispered, his voice breaking. Maybe I am holding you back from the life you deserve. I grabbed his face, forcing him to look at me. You are the life I deserve. They're the ones holding me back from happiness. Chris's family filled the gap my own family left. His mother, Mrs. Joyce, held my hands before the ceremony and said, "You're my daughter now, in every way that matters." I cried tears of gratitude and grief all at once. The wedding was beautiful, intimate, real. The next morning, I woke up to a notification on my phone. Someone had tagged me in a post on the Pope Dynasty, my family's official Facebook page. My hands shook as I opened it. The first line hit me like a punch to the chest. Images and videos have come to our attention showing our daughter, Olivia Pope, getting married to one Chris in a wedding ceremony in Ohio. My breath caught. My vision blurred. This disclaimer serves to notify all acquaintances, family, and friends that the Pope family of Chicago is not aware of any marriage ceremony of our daughter, Olivia Pope. Neither did we grant permission nor support in this regard. Tears spilled down my cheeks before I could stop them. It was signed by my father, Graham Pope. Posted publicly. For everyone to see. They had disowned me. Erased my marriage. Declared my husband unworthy of acknowledgement in front of their entire social circle. Olivia? Chris's voice was soft, concerned. He sat up and took the phone from my shaking hands. I watched his face as he read it. Saw the hurt flash across his eyes, then the anger, then the protective love that made him pull me close. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into my hair. I sobbed in his arms that morning, mourning the family I'd always wanted but never really had. The pain was physical, a hollow ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. "We don't need them," Chris whispered. "We have each other, and we're going to build something incredible." I cried harder, but somewhere beneath the grief, something else was taking root. Resolve. They had made their choice. Now I would make mine. I cut them off completely after that. No calls. No visits. No attempts at reconciliation. If they wanted me erased from their perfect family portrait, then I would erase them from my life. For the first time, I chose myself.
And Chris was right.
We did build something incredible. 6 years passed, and our lives turned around. I became a business analyst, using my degree to help Chris launch what would become our legacy. Together, we created C&O Jewelry, a luxury brand that combined Chris's artistic vision with my strategic mind. Chris designed custom pieces for celebrities, politicians, and collectors. His work became synonymous with elegance and craftsmanship. We expanded into rare timepieces, curating collections that attracted serious buyers from around the world. Our business thrived. More importantly, our marriage thrived. We built a life filled with purpose, passion, and partnership. Everything my family said we'd never have. Then one cold November evening, my phone buzzed with a notification. An email. Sender was the Graham Pope family. Inside was an invitation to Christmas dinner at my parents' estate. I stared at it for a long time, my stomach twisting with old pain. "What are you thinking?" Chris asked gently. "I'm thinking they don't do anything without a reason," I said. 6 years of silence, and now this? Maybe they want to make amends. I looked at my husband, his face full of hope and forgiveness. Chris had never held grudges, even against people who'd hurt him deeply. "Maybe," I said, though every instinct screamed otherwise. "Go," he encouraged. "If nothing else, you'll have closure." But I wasn't naive. I knew my family. I prepared a backup plan, just in case things went the way I suspected they would. I gathered a carefully curated collection of photos of Chris and me, Everything from our happiest moments together to the milestones of building our business. I handed them over to a professional designer who transformed them into a beautifully crafted photo book. Then I had 24 copies printed, each one ready to make my family see the truth for themselves. Christmas Eve arrived with a kind of cold that bites straight through your coat. We drove to my parents' estate, the mansion lit up like something from a magazine spread. Cars lined the circular driveway, expensive and gleaming. The door opened before we could knock. My mother stood there, and to my shock, she smiled. "Olivia, darling. And Chris. Welcome." The warmth in her voice felt rehearsed, like lines from a play she'd practiced too many times. My father appeared behind her, extending his hand to Chris. "Good to see you both." I felt Chris relax beside me, but I remained tense. Something felt wrong. The house was filled with extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years. Everyone greeted us warmly, though I caught curious glances and whispered conversations. As we hung our coats, I noticed my cousin Rebecca lean toward her husband, murmuring something while glancing our way. Her eyes were sympathetic, almost pitying. That's when I felt it again, the same tension I used to feel growing up. That electric current in the air right before something terrible happened. My mother appeared at my elbow, with champagne. "You must be exhausted from the drive. Let me take your bag to the guest room." She'd never offered to carry anything for me in my life. Chris squeezed my hand, mistaking my silence for emotion.
See?
Maybe they really have changed. I wanted to believe him, but the tightness in my chest said otherwise. As dinner preparations continued, I excused myself and wandered upstairs, drawn to my old bedroom. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. Photos on the walls, books on the shelves, memories frozen in time. For a moment, I let myself wonder if Chris was right. Maybe they had changed. I decided to find my father, to talk with him privately before dinner. His study door was slightly ajar, and as I approached, I heard voices inside. Then I heard my name. I froze. "Olivia must be suffering," my mother was saying. "Did you see how thin she's gotten? Chris clearly isn't taking care of her." "The man looks like he can barely afford a decent suit," my father added. "Tonight's the perfect opportunity," Alice chimed in. "We need to embarrass him publicly. Make Olivia see what a mistake she's made." My heart began to pound. "Alexander Chase will be perfect for her," Aunt Marilyn said. "Wealthy, connected, from a good family. Everything Chris isn't." "Once we humiliate Chris enough at dinner," my father continued, "Olivia will finally see reason. She'll leave him, and we can introduce her properly to Alexander." My mother laughed softly. "It's really for her own good. She's wasted 6 years of her life." I backed away from the door, tears streaming down my face. My whole body shook with the betrayal. They hadn't changed. This dinner wasn't about reconciliation. It was about control, about breaking me down and reshaping me into what they wanted. I stood in the hallway, crying silently, then forced myself to breathe, to think. I couldn't let them see me break. Not yet. I wiped my tears, steadied my hands, and walked back downstairs with a calm expression that betrayed nothing. Dinner began with crystal glasses and practiced elegance. My father stood to make a toast, and I felt Chris's hand squeeze mine under the table. "To family," my father began, his voice carrying across the room. Then his eyes landed on Chris. "Even when that family looks different than we expected." Uncomfortable laughs rippled through the guests. "Chris, I'm curious," my father continued, setting down his glass. "What exactly is it that you do? I mean, we know you work with your hands, but surely that can't be sustainable long-term." Chris began to answer, but my father cut him off. "A jewelry shop, isn't it? How quaint. I suppose everyone needs hobbies." He took a long sip of wine. "Though I can't imagine the margins on trinkets are particularly impressive." My cousin David snickered from across the table, quickly covering it with a cough. "And Olivia, darling, you look so tired. Almost gaunt. Are you eating enough? Is everything all right at home?" The implication hung in the air like poison. I felt Chris tense beside me, his face flushing with humiliation. My sister Alice leaned forward with false concern. It must be so hard, living on such a limited budget. Have you considered asking father for help? She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering her own cut. You know, Alexander Chase was asking about you at the club last week. He just returned from opening his third resort in the Maldives. Such an accomplished man. And still single. She glanced meaningfully at Chris. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Then my father delivered his final blow. Christopher, I think we all just want what's best for Olivia. And frankly, this arrangement doesn't seem to be working out. Perhaps it's time you both faced reality. The room fell silent. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. Every eye turned to me. I have a surprise for everyone, I said calmly. Give me just a moment. My father's hand moved toward me, as if to stop me. Olivia, we're in the middle of. It won't take long, I said, meeting his eyes with a steadiness that made him freeze. I walked out of the dining room, leaving confusion in my wake. Chris looked at me with worry, but I gave him a small smile that said, "Trust me." I returned carrying a paper bag. From it, I pulled 24 identical photo books, the one I had the designer make, their covers elegant and understated. I walked around the table slowly, deliberately, placing one in front of each family member. My mother's hand trembled as I set hers down. "Please open them," I said. The sound of pages turning filled the room. The first photos showed Chris and me on beaches, hiking trails, enjoying life together.
Smiling.
Thriving. Deeply in love. Then came photos of our work. Our jewelry studio. Pieces we designed. The C&O logo prominently displayed. Uncle Pete's eyes widened.
Wait.
You own C&O? Chris nodded quietly beside me, his jaw set.
Wow.
Uncle Pete yelled. More pages turned. Photos of Chris with celebrities wearing his designs. Politicians. Influential collectors. A 2-page spread showed Chris shaking hands with the mayor of New York at a charity gala where we donated a custom piece. The room went completely silent. I watched my father's face drain of color as he stared at the images. My sister Alice had stopped turning pages entirely, frozen on a photograph of Chris receiving an award. Then Chris spoke, his voice calm but firm. You wanted to know what I do? Here it is. Gasps and whispers filled the room. That's C&O jewelry? The C&O? Someone asked from the far end of the table. Chris designs for. Another voice trailed off in shock. I let them absorb it. Let them see the truth they'd been too blind and too cruel to recognize. My mother tried to close her book, but her hands were shaking too badly. Then I spoke. 6 years ago, my parents refused to attend my wedding. They told Chris to his face that he would never be allowed to be with me. The next day, they posted a public disclaimer on Facebook, disowning my marriage and declaring my husband unworthy of the Pope bloodline. The room went completely silent. Some family members looked down, embarrassed. Tonight, I came here hoping maybe things had changed. Maybe after 6 years, they'd be willing to see who Chris really is, who we've become together. I paused, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. But earlier this evening, I overheard a conversation in my father's study. My parents, my sister, and my aunt were planning to publicly humiliate Chris at this very dinner. Their goal was to embarrass him so thoroughly that I would question my marriage and leave him. Shocked murmurs spread across the table. My mother's face had gone pale. My father stared at his plate. They wanted to push me toward Alexander Chase, someone they deemed more suitable, wealthier, better connected, more acceptable. I looked directly at my father. You asked what Chris does. He's one of the most sought-after jewelry designers in the country. He's created pieces for people you claim to respect and admire. He's built a business that thrives on integrity, something this family wouldn't recognize if it was handed to you on a silver platter. My voice never wavered. You said I look tired. I look happy. I look loved. I look like a woman who chose her own path and succeeded despite everything you did to stop her. I reached for Chris's hand. The truth is, no one deserves to be looked down upon because no one holds the keys to tomorrow. You judged Chris by his background instead of his character. You judged me by your standards instead of my happiness. And tonight, you plan to destroy the best thing that ever happened to me. I looked around the table at faces filled with shock and shame. I came here tonight hoping for family. Instead, I found the same cruelty wrapped in Christmas decorations. So Chris and I are leaving. And this time, we won't be coming back. I stood, and Chris rose beside me. We walked toward the door, the dining room silent behind us. Then someone started clapping. I turned to see my uncle standing, applauding slowly.
Then a cousin joined.
Another. Then another. Soon, half the table was standing, clapping for our courage, for our truth, for our dignity. My parents sat frozen, their carefully constructed evening demolished. Alice stared at her plate, unable to meet anyone's eyes. I gave a small nod of gratitude to those who stood with us. Then Chris and I walked out the door and into the cold night air. That evening, we sat in our hotel room, the city lights twinkling through the window. "I'm sorry," Chris said softly. "For what? That you had to do that? That they put you through that?" I shook my head and took his hands in mine. "Don't be sorry. Tonight, I finally closed a door that should have been closed years ago. I chose us. Publicly." Chris pulled me close, and I let myself cry. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd finally released. My family wanted to destroy us. Instead, they only made us stronger. If you're watching this and you've ever been made to feel less because you chose love over approval, because you built your own path instead of following someone else's, I want you to know something. Fight for what you believe in. Fight for who you love. Don't let anyone's limited vision hinder your possibilities. Your worth isn't determined by people who refuse to see your value. It's determined by how you show up for yourself and the ones who matter. Chris and I didn't need the Pope family's approval to build something extraordinary. We just needed each other. And that, it turned out, was more than enough. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, hit subscribe and join me for more real-life tales of love, betrayal, and triumph.